The planet of Nine was a strange and haunting place, its surface covered in sprawling fungal forests that glowed faintly under the light of two moons. It wasn't the kind of world most humans would call home, but for settlers like Mason, it was an opportunity to start fresh. Had always been more comfortable with plants than people. His days were spent studying soil samples and cataloging the unique vegetation that thrived on this alien soil. He preferred solitude, finding peace in the quiet hum of his tools and the rustling leaves of the forest. One evening, as the twin moons rose high into the sky, ventured deeper into the fungal woods than usual. He was checking remote sensor traps set up to monitor wildlife activity near the colony's perimeter. Most nights, these traps yielded little more than data logs and the occasional insect-like creature caught in their nets. But tonight was different. As he approached one of the sensors, he noticed something unusual, a faint whimpering sound coming from beneath the collapsed remains of the device. Curious, knelt down and pushed aside the broken pieces of metal and plastic. There, trembling and half buried in dirt, was a small wolf-like creature no bigger than a house cat. Its fur shimmered silver-gray in the moonlight, catching the glow of bioluminescent fungi scattered across the forest floor. Its wide, amber eyes locked onto his face, filled with both fear and curiosity. Despite its obvious distress, the cub didn't try to run or snap at him when he reached out gently. Instead, it let out another soft whimper, almost like a plea. Hesitated. Bringing back an unknown animal went against every protocol the colony had drilled into its settlers. Alien species could carry diseases, disrupt ecosystems, or even pose threats they couldn't anticipate. But looking at the fragile creature before him, shivering and alone, couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. Wrapping it carefully in his jacket, he carried it back to his unit. Back at his modest quarters, cleaned the cub's wounds and fed it scraps of dried protein from his rations. The cub ate hungrily, its movements clumsy yet determined. Over the next few days, observed the creature closely. It seemed intelligent, watching him with those piercing amber eyes whenever he moved around the room. Though wary at first, the cub soon grew comfortable enough to follow him, padding softly behind him wherever he went. Began calling it Kip, after the way it nipped playfully at his fingers when he offered food. Word spread quickly through the settlement about the mysterious cub living with. At first, people were skeptical. "What are you gonna do with it?" asked one of the engineers during a supply run. "It's not exactly a pet," replied, though he wasn't sure what else to call it. Others were fascinated. A biologist named stopped by one evening to examine Kip, marveling at its unique physiology. "This might be she said, her voice tinged with awe. "They're supposed to be extinct. According to old records, were once a proud pack species native to Nine. They were known for their intelligence, loyalty, and fierce protectiveness of their young. During the war decades ago, entire packs had been wiped out by orbital bombardments meant to clear the land for colonization. If Kip truly was then he was likely the last of his kind, or so everyone thought. As weeks passed, Kip grew rapidly, his sleek frame becoming leaner and stronger. Yet despite his physical changes, his behavior remained oddly docile. Unlike other predators, Kip showed no aggression toward humans or any of the local fauna. Instead, he seemed content to stay close to, curling up at the foot of his cot each night. For who had spent most of his life avoiding attachments, the bond forming between them felt unfamiliar but undeniably real. One day, while exploring the edge of the fungal forest, stumbled upon another surprise. Hidden among the glowing mushrooms was a second cub, smaller and weaker than Kip had been when he found him. This one bore the same shimmering fur and amber eyes, confirming his theory. They were. Word of the discovery traveled fast, and within hours, settlers began reporting of similar creatures lurking near the colony's outskirts. Each time, someone brought the frightened juveniles to his unit, trusting him to care for them. Soon, his unit became a makeshift sanctuary for these orphaned. Though unrelated by blood, they formed a ragtag group united by shared trauma and survival instincts. Without adult guidance, they relied on instinct, and increasingly on Kip to navigate their new environment. To the settlers, Kip wasn't just another cub. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the aftermath of destruction, life could endure. But symbols have a way of attracting attention, especially from those seeking order in chaos. When envoys from the Interstellar Council arrived to assess the colony's progress, they saw potential in Kip. In their eyes, promoting him to leader of the pack could legitimize the settlers' claim to the planet. What they failed to understand was that leadership among the was granted, it was earned. And Kip, for all his resilience, hadn't asked for such responsibility. For now, the cubs slept peacefully at its feet, unaware of the storm brewing beyond their sanctuary. The forest whispered secrets only they could hear, while above, the twin moons cast their pale glow over a world poised on the brink of change. The arrival of more cubs at its unit changed everything. What had started as a quiet bond between one man and a lone cub quickly grew into something larger, something none of the settlers could have anticipated. Each new cub brought its own personality, some shy and skittish, others bold and curious, but they all shared one thing in common, an unspoken need for safety. Without elders to guide them, these young turned to Kip, the first among them, as if he held some invisible thread that connected them to their past. At first, the settlers were unsure how to handle the growing number of Around's unit. Some worried about resources. "We can't feed them forever," muttered Greg, the colony's logistics manager, during a meeting. Others saw potential in the imagining ways they might help with tasks like patrolling or carrying supplies, but refused to let anyone treat the cubs as tools. To him, they weren't assets or experiments. They were survivors, just like the humans who had come to Nine seeking a second chance. As the weeks went by, they began adapting to life near the settlement. They explored the edges of the fungal forest, learning which plants were safe to eat and which creatures to avoid. During the day, they played together, chasing each other through the glowing underbrush or wrestling in patches of soft moss. At night, however, they always returned to his unit, clustering around the doorway or curling up on blankets he left out for them. Their presence became a kind of routine, comforting in its predictability. Word of the spread beyond the colony, reaching the ears of the Interstellar Council. Representatives arrived unexpectedly one morning, their sleek shuttle descending onto the landing pad near the main hub. These envoys wore formal uniforms adorned with insignias marking their authority, and their expressions were unreadable as they stepped onto the dusty ground of Nine. Their mission was clear: assess whether the colony was sustainable enough to warrant continued funding and support. When the council members learned about they showed immediate interest. "This is unprecedented," said one envoy, a tall woman named, her voice sharp with excitement. "If we can establish a functioning pack structure here, it could set a precedent for coexistence between humans and native species." She spoke as though there were pieces in a puzzle, elements to be arranged neatly into place. The idea of promoting Kip to leader came up almost casually during a discussion over dinner. The settlers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one objected outright. After all, what harm could there be in giving the cub a title? It wasn't as if they understood human concepts of hierarchy, or so everyone assumed. For in her team, elevating Kip to alpha status seemed like a simple solution to a complex problem. A recognized pack structure would satisfy planetary sovereignty laws, ensuring the colony retained control over Nine, without interference from corporate interests eager to exploit its resources. Didn't argue when the council announced their plan. Deep down, though, he felt uneasy. He knew they weren't like domesticated animals. They weren't bound by human rules or expectations. Still, he agreed to go along with the ceremony, hoping it would placate the envoys and give the colony time to figure things out on their own terms. The promotion ceremony took place under the twin moons, their light casting long shadows across the clearing where the settlers gathered. Lanterns hung from makeshift poles, illuminating the faces of both humans and alike. The air was thick with anticipation, though not everyone shared the same enthusiasm. The biologist who had identified Kip as a stood off to the side, arms crossed. "This feels wrong," she murmured too. They're forcing something unnatural. Nodded silently, unable to put his unease into words. As the moment approached, Kip sat quietly beside him, his amber eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. When stepped forward holding a silver band engraved with ancient runes, the crowd fell silent. The band itself was beautiful, crafted to resemble vines twisting together, but it carried a weight far heavier than its physical form. "This ceremony marks a new beginning," declared, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Today, we recognize Kip as the alpha of this pack, a symbol of unity between our two species." With those words, she knelt before Kip and placed the band around his neck. There was a soft click as the clasp locked into place, sealing the title onto the cub. For a moment, nothing happened. Kip remained still, his gaze fixed on. Then slowly he lowered his head, his posture shifting in a way that made stomach tighten. Instead of standing tall or issuing any kind of challenge, Kip simply turned away. Ignoring the murmurs of confusion rippling through the crowd, he padded towards Unit, stopping only when he reached the door. One by one, the other followed, forming a loose circle around the entrance. They didn't growl or posture. They simply lay down, their breathing steady and calm. The council members stared, baffled. "What does this mean?" asked, her tone sharp with frustration. No one answered, even couldn't explain what he was seeing. To the humans, Kip's actions seemed like rejection, a refusal to accept the role thrust upon him. But to it meant something else entirely. In the days that followed, the council struggled to make sense of what had happened. They questioned repeatedly, demanding explanations he couldn't provide. Meanwhile, they continued their nightly ritual of gathering outside his unit. Though the council pushed for another attempt at establishing leadership, the settlers quietly resisted. Something about the scene, the image of those young resting peacefully in the moonlight, felt sacred, untouchable. Spent hours observing trying to understand their behavior. He noticed subtle changes in their interactions. While they didn't follow Kip in the traditional sense of an alpha leading a pack, they clearly looked to him for reassurance. When one of the cubs ventured too close to the perimeter fence, Kip would trot over and nudge it back towards safety. When food was scarce, he waited until the others had eaten before taking his share. Leadership, realized, wasn't about dominance, it was about trust. The settlers began adjusting their routines to accommodate the extra blankets were left out each night, and lights were dimmed earlier to create a calmer atmosphere. Conversations softened, voices lowering to match the quiet rhythm of the forest. Slowly, a new kind of balance emerged, not between ruler and subjects, but between equals sharing space. And her team eventually departed, leaving behind a report filled with cautious optimism. They couldn't deny the bond forming between humans, and even if they didn't fully understand it. For the settlers, the departure marked a turning point. They stopped trying to impose human structures on and instead focused on fostering the connection that had already taken root. Under the twin moons, they rested peacefully, their bodies rising and falling with each breath. Watched them from the doorway, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, the sight of those young creatures sleeping soundly was enough. In their silence, he found a kind of peace, one that transcended language, species, and fear. And perhaps in that moment, the true meaning of belonging began to awaken. The silver band around Kip's neck was meant to be a symbol, but it felt more like a chain. Though the council members had left 9, their presence lingered in the air like an unspoken question. What did it mean for Kip to wear that collar? To the settlers, it was a reminder of the pressure placed on them to conform to human ideas of order. To Kip himself, it seemed meaningless, a piece of cold metal that didn't belong. Yet there it stayed, glinting faintly under the twin moons as if daring anyone to take it off. Noticed changes in Kip almost immediately after the ceremony. The cub, once playful and curious, began spending more time alone. He would wander into the fungal forest during the day, staying away for hours at a time. When he returned, his coat was often damp with dew, and his amber eyes carried a shadow of something couldn't quite name, sadness maybe or defiance. The other noticed too. They followed Kip less frequently now, though they still gathered outside's unit every night. Their loyalty hadn't wavered, but their behavior suggested uncertainty, as if they were waiting for him to make a decision he wasn't ready to face. Visited often, bringing data pads filled with notes about behavior. She crouched near Kip one evening, studying the way he held himself apart from the others. "He doesn't want this," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "You can see it in his posture, in the way he avoids looking at them. He's rejecting the role they forced on him." Nodded, his hands gripping the edge of his cot. "But what do we do?" he asked. "Take the collar off, pretend none of this ever happened." "It's not that simple," replied. "To the Council, that collar represents control. If we remove it, we're sending a message, one they might not like." Sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to protect Kip, to shield him from the weight of expectations neither of them had chosen. But how could he fight against forces so much larger than himself? The Council wasn't just a group of people. It was an institution, a system built on rules and hierarchies. Removing the collar wouldn't erase those structures. It might only invite more scrutiny. As days turned into weeks, they adapted to their new reality. They continued exploring the edges of the colony, learning the rhythms of the land and the patterns of its creatures. Some even began mimicking human behaviors, carrying small objects or nudging tools closer to the settlers working nearby. It was as if they were trying to prove their worth, to show they could contribute without needing titles or ceremonies. For these moments were bittersweet. On one hand, he was proud of how far they'd come. On the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being asked to fit into roles they weren't meant for. One night as the settlement slept, a storm rolled in. Thunder rumbled across the sky, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Lightning illuminated the fungal forest, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls of his unit. They huddled together outside, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Kip lay slightly apart from the group, his head resting on his paws. Even in the chaos of the storm, he seemed distant, lost in thought. Stepped outside, pulling a heavy jacket over his shoulders. The rain soaked through his boots almost instantly, but he didn't care. He knelt beside Kip, placing a hand gently on his back. "Hey," he said softly, "you okay?" Kip lifted his head, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, quiet understanding. Slowly he stood and nudged his arm with his nose, then turned and walked toward the forest. Hesitated, unsure whether to follow. But something about Kip's movements, the deliberate way he moved, the certainty in each step, told him to go. The forest was alive with sound. Raindrops hit the glowing fungi, creating a soft percussion that echoed through the trees. Kip led deeper into the woods, stopping occasionally to glance back and ensure he was still following. Finally, they reached a clearing where the storm seemed to pause, its fury giving way to a strange calm. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled with age. Embedded in the bark was a fragment of metal, part of an old sensor pod, long abandoned. Kip approached the tree and sat down, his tail curling neatly around his legs. Joined him, sitting cross-legged on the wet ground. For a while neither of them spoke. The storm raged on in the distance, but here, in this small pocket of stillness, everything felt different. Reached out and touched the silver band around Kip's neck, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. "Do you hate it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kip tilted his head as if considering the question. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he shook his entire body, sending droplets of water flying in all directions. The gesture was playful, almost mischievous, and it made laugh despite himself. Maybe the collar didn't matter to Kip, not really. Maybe what mattered was the bond between them, the trust that had grown stronger with each passing day. When they returned to the settlement, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean by rain. They greeted them warmly, their tails wagging as they bounded forward. Noticed something new in their demeanor, a sense of ease, as if the tension that had been building within the group had finally broken. Even Kip seemed lighter, his steps quicker and more confident. Over the next few days, the settlers began noticing subtle changes in this behavior. They worked together more seamlessly, coordinating tasks without needing guidance. One morning, when Greg complained about a malfunctioning irrigation system, three appeared out of nowhere, carrying spare parts in their mouths. Another time, found a lost tool buried in the dirt, only to discover it had been retrieved by one of the younger cubs. These acts of cooperation weren't forced. They came naturally, born out of mutual respect rather than obligation. The Council's report arrived unexpectedly, delivered via a secure transmission. His voice crackled through the speakers, her tone professional but tinged with frustration. "We've reviewed your updates," she said. "While they appear to be adapting, we're concerned about the lack of formal leadership. Without structure, there's potential for instability." Clenched his fists, resisting the urge to argue. Instead, he focused on showing the Council what they couldn't see, the quiet strength of the way they relied on instinct rather than hierarchy. He recorded videos of their daily routines, capturing moments of teamwork and connection. He documented their interactions with the settlers, highlighting the bonds that had formed over time. And most importantly, he included footage of Kip, lying peacefully among the others, his silver band glinting faintly in the sunlight. When the response came, it was brief but telling. "Your observations have been noted," wrote. "Further action will depend on continued progress." It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. For now, that was enough. In the evenings, as the twin moons rose high into the sky, the gathered outside's unit as usual. Kip always took his place near the doorway, his presence steady and reassuring. Sometimes would sit beside him, scratching behind his ears or simply watching the stars. Other times he would leave the door open, letting the drift in and out as they pleased. They didn't need words to communicate. Their actions spoke louder than any language ever could. The collar remained around Kip's neck, a silent testament to the challenges they had faced, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it became a reminder of resilience, of finding strength in unexpected places. Underneath the weight of expectation, they had discovered something rare and beautiful, a sense of belonging that transcended titles and symbols. And in that discovery, they found peace. They had become a part of the settlement, their presence woven into the fabric of daily life. They weren't just animals anymore. They were companions, helpers, and protectors. Yet the Council's shadow still lingered over Nine, its rules and expectations pressing down on the settlers like an invisible weight. The silver band around Kip's neck remained a constant reminder of that pressure, glinting faintly in the light of the twin moons. But something was changing, slowly and quietly, beneath the surface. Noticed it first in the way they interacted with each other. There was no clear leader among them, no alpha dictating orders or enforcing discipline. Instead, they worked together as equals, relying on instinct and trust rather than hierarchy. When one of the younger cubs ventured too close to the edge of the fungal forest, another would nudge it back toward safety. If food was scarce, the stronger waited until the weaker ones had eaten before taking their share. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension and confusion, but it worked. And too, it felt more natural than anything the Council had tried to impose. The settlers began adapting to this new dynamic, learning to live alongside them without trying to control them. They left blankets out at night, dimmed the lights earlier, and spoke softly to avoid startling the sensitive creatures. In return, they started patrolling the edges of the colony, their keen senses alert to any signs of danger. They didn't bark or growl like guard dogs. Instead, they moved silently, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness for threats. It was as if they understood their role, not because someone told them, but because it felt right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a group of raiders from the Black Rim appeared on the outskirts of the settlement. These scavengers were notorious for their raids on frontier colonies, stealing supplies and causing chaos wherever they went. Most settlements hired mercenaries or installed heavy defenses to keep them at bay. But Nine was different. It had The raiders crept through the fungal forest under cover of darkness, their movements careful but clumsy compared to this grace. As they approached the colony's perimeter, a low growl rippled through the air. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but it carried a warning that sent chills down the spines of the intruders. Before they could react, they emerged from the shadows, their sleek forms blending seamlessly with the glowing fungi around them. There was no violence, no bloodshed. They didn't attack the raiders, they herded them. Moving in perfect coordination, they formed a circle around the invaders, cutting off escape routes and guiding them toward the containment field set up by the settlers. The raiders stumbled forward, disoriented and terrified, their weapons useless against the silent, relentless force surrounding them. By the time the settlers arrived to secure the prisoners, they had already done most of the work. The next morning, news of the raid spread quickly through the colony. People gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about what had happened. "Did you see how they worked together?" asked Greg, his voice filled with awe. "Like they knew exactly what to do." Nodded, her expression thoughtful. "They've been doing this all along," she said. "We just didn't realize it." Stood nearby, watching Kip and the other resting peacefully outside his unit. Their actions during the raid hadn't been planned or rehearsed. It had come naturally, born out of instinct and shared purpose. To the settlers, it felt like a turning point. For the first time, they truly understood the value of the, not as symbols or tools, but as partners. But the council saw things differently. When word of the raid reached Earth, it sparked debate among scholars and officials. Some praised this role in defending the colony, calling it proof of successful coexistence between humans and native species. Others viewed it as evidence of instability, arguing that the lack of formal leadership within the pack posed a risk to the settlement's security. The envoy who had visited earlier found herself caught in the middle of these conflicting opinions. "We need to reassess our approach," she said during a meeting with her superiors. "They are clearly capable of contributing to the colony's survival, but their behavior doesn't align with traditional models of leadership." Her colleagues listened carefully, their expressions skeptical. "Models exist for a reason," one of them replied. "If we abandon structure entirely, we risk losing control." Sighed, knowing they wouldn't understand. She had seen firsthand how they operated, how their bond with the settlers transcended human concepts of order and authority. But convincing others to see it her way was proving difficult. Back on 9, life continued much as it always had. The settlers adjusted their routines to accommodate the, leaving extra food out at night and ensuring the perimeter fences were reinforced. They in turn grew bolder, venturing farther into the fungal forest during the day and returning to the settlement at dusk. Their nightly gatherings outside, unit became a kind of ritual, a quiet celebration of the connection they shared. Kip still wore the silver band, though it seemed less significant now. It was just another part of him, neither accepted nor rejected. To the settlers, it was a reminder of the challenges they had overcome, and those that still lay ahead. But it represented something deeper: resilience, trust, and the power of quiet rebellion. One night, as the twin moons cast their pale glow over the settlement, sat outside with Kip by his side. The air was cool and still, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of an insect-like creature. Around them, the lay curled together, their breathing steady and calm. Reached out and scratched behind Kip's ears, smiling as the cub leaned into his touch. "You did good," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the forest. "All of you did." Kip tilted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. There was no pride in his gaze, no sense of accomplishment, just quiet understanding, as if he already knew what was trying to say. In the days that followed, the settlers began documenting their experiences with hopping to share their story with the wider world. They recorded videos of the creatures working alongside humans, playing in the fungal forest, and resting peacefully under the stars. They wrote detailed reports describing how they had adapted to life near the colony and contributed to its survival. And they included photographs of Kip, his silver band gleaming faintly in the sunlight, as a symbol of everything they had achieved together. When the council reviewed these materials, they were divided. Some members argued that the success proved the effectiveness of coexistence, while others insisted it highlighted the dangers of abandoning established structures. Fought hard to sway the decision in favor of the settlers, presenting evidence of this loyalty and intelligence. Her arguments weren't enough to win outright approval, but they did convince the council to delay further action, for now. For the settlers, this reprieve was enough. They knew they couldn't be forced into roles they didn't understand, just as humans couldn't be expected to conform to systems that didn't fit. What mattered was the bond they had built, fragile but enduring, in a world where survival depended on cooperation rather than control. As the seasons changed, bringing cooler nights and brighter days, they continued to thrive. They explored the edges of the fungal forest, learning its secrets and sharing them with the settlers. They played with the children of the colony, their playful antics bringing laughter and joy to even the darkest corners of the settlement. And every night, without fail, they returned to this unit, curling up beside the door or drifting inside to rest near the warmth of the fire. The silver band around Kip's neck remained a silent testament to the challenges they had faced, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it became a symbol of resilience, of finding strength in unexpected places. Underneath the weight of expectation, they had discovered something rare and beautiful, a sense of belonging that transcended titles and symbols. And in that discovery, they found peace. Though the council's shadow still loomed large, the settlers knew they had created something special, a fragile yet enduring connection between two species struggling to survive on a harsh and alien world. For now, that connection was enough. Months passed, and life on Nine settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. They were no longer outsiders. They were part of the colony, their presence woven into every aspect of daily existence. They worked alongside the settlers, patrolled the edges of the settlement, and even helped with tasks like carrying supplies or tending to the greenhouse plants. Yet what truly defined their bond was the quiet moments, the way they gathered around this unit each night, seeking comfort and connection in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. Had grown used to this nightly ritual. He left the door open, letting them drift in and out as they pleased. Some nights, they curled up outside under the twin moons, their bodies forming a loose circle around the entrance. Other nights, they ventured inside, lying near the fire or resting at the foot of his cot. Kip always stayed close, his silver band glinting faintly in the dim light. It was a reminder of everything they had been through together, of challenges overcome and bonds forged in silence. The council's influence began to fade as time went on. Their reports grew less frequent, their demands softer. Still sent updates, but her tone had shifted from formal and clinical to almost admiring. "They are thriving," she wrote in one message. "Their cooperation with the settlers is unprecedented. Perhaps coexistence doesn't require structure after all." For the settlers, this shift was a victory, a quiet rebellion against systems that sought to impose order where none was needed. They stopped worrying about protocols and titles, focusing instead on nurturing the relationships they had built. Extra blankets were left out each night, and low fires burned steadily in hearths across the settlement. Conversations softened, voices lowering to match the calm rhythm of the forest. Slowly, a new kind of balance emerged, not between ruler and subjects, but between equals sharing space. One evening, as the twin moons rose high into the sky, sat by the fire with. She had brought over a data pad filled with notes about her face glowing with excitement. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a graph showing how this behavior patterns had changed over time. "They're adapting faster than we thought possible." Smiled, glancing toward the doorway where Kip lay curled up with two younger. "It's not just adaptation," he said. "It's trust. They know we won't hurt them." Nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And we've learned to trust them too. That raid proved it. Without those black-rimmed scavengers might have caused real damage." Leaned back, staring into the flames. He remembered the night of the raid vividly, the way they had moved as one, silent and coordinated, guiding the intruders toward containment fields without violence. It wasn't just skill or instinct. It was something deeper, a shared purpose born of mutual respect. To the settlers, it felt like proof that their bond with the was stronger than any rule or regulation imposed by distant authorities. As winter approached, bringing colder nights and shorter days, they became even more integral to life in the settlement. They helped insulate the greenhouses with layers of moss and leaves, keeping the plants warm despite the dropping temperatures. At night, they clustered together for warmth, their bodies radiating heat that kept both humans and comfortable. Noticed how easily the settlers adapted to these changes, leaving doors ajar and sharing food without hesitation. The line between species blurred, replaced by a sense of unity that transcended language or biology. Kip, for his part, seemed content. He no longer wandered off alone during the day, preferring to stay near or explore the edges of the fungal forest with the others. His silver band remained untouched, its significance fading with each passing month. It was just another part of him, a relic of a past they had moved beyond. To the settlers, it was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of how far they had come together. One cold morning, as frost covered the ground and the air smelled crisp and sharp, Greg approached with an idea. "What if we expand the living quarters?" he asked. "Make room for the inside. They're already part of the family. We might as well treat them that way." Hesitated, unsure how the council would react. But when he looked at Kip, who was watching him intently, he realized it didn't matter. They weren't tools or experiments. They were partners, deserving of the same care and respect as any human settler. Together, the colony began modifying their units, creating spaces where could rest comfortably during the coldest nights. Blankets were hung as makeshift walls, and low platforms were built to give them places to lie without disturbing the humans. The changes weren't drastic, but they made a difference. On especially frigid evenings, they would gather indoors, their soft breathing mingling with the crackling of the fire. Children played with them, tossing toys across the room and laughing as they chased after them. Adults talked softly, sharing stories and meals while they rested nearby. For the first time, the settlement felt like a true home, not just for humans but for everyone who called it theirs. When spring returned, bringing warmer weather and brighter skies, they resumed their patrols of the fungal forest. They explored farther than ever before, discovering hidden clearings and streams that the settlers had never seen. Each discovery was shared, communicated through gestures and sounds that bridged the gap between species. The settlers began venturing deeper into the forest too, guided by this instincts and knowledge. Together, they mapped the land, learning its secrets and finding ways to live in harmony with its rhythms. News of the colony's success reached Earth, sparking debates among scholars and politicians. Some praised the settlers' approach, calling it a model for future coexistence efforts. Others criticized it, arguing that abandoning traditional structures risked chaos and instability. Found herself at the center of these discussions, defending the settlers' choices while navigating the complexities of interstellar politics. "They're rewriting the rules," she told her colleagues during a heated meeting. "Not because they want to rebel, but because they've found something better, a way of living that works for both humans and—" Her words fell on mixed ears. Some members of the council remained skeptical, unwilling to let go of systems they had spent decades building. But others listened, intrigued by the possibility of a new path forward. In the end, the council decided to classify 9 as a cohabitation zone, a designation that recognized them not as pets or symbols, but as equal partners in the colony's survival. For the settlers, the decision was a relief. It meant freedom from constant scrutiny and interference, allowing them to focus on the lives they had built together. They celebrated quietly, gathering around fires and sharing meals with the. There were no speeches or ceremonies, just laughter, warmth, and the unspoken understanding that they had created something rare and beautiful. As the seasons turned, they continued to thrive. They grew stronger and more confident, their movements graceful and sure. Kip, now fully grown, led by example rather than command, earning the trust and loyalty of his pack through actions rather than words. The settlers followed his lead, treating them with kindness and respect, knowing that their bond was based on mutual need and shared purpose. On cold nights, when the twin moons cast long shadows across the settlement, the line between species disappeared entirely. Humans and rested side by side, their breaths rising and falling in sync. For watching them sleep felt like witnessing something sacred, a fragile yet enduring connection that explanation. In those moments, he understood what true belonging meant, not dominance or control, but presence. Simply being there, offering safety and trust, was enough. The bed became a hearth, a place where warmth and comfort flowed freely between humans and alike. And in that warmth, a new kind of civilization began to take root, one built not on power or authority, but on the quiet strength of shared survival. Underneath the twin moons, surrounded by glowing fungi and rustling leaves, the settlers and the found peace, not as rulers or subjects, but as equals sharing a home beneath the stars.